Ishiro Honda once said that the tragedy of monsters is the fact that they are born too tall, too strong, and too heavy. And at least in the context of the films, he was right. These attributes have led to Godzilla having many disagreements with the Japanese military. But at least in the context of pop culture, these attributes have led to the opposite for Godzilla. They've allowed him to prosper and produce 28 movies. But I want to analyze this and discover what it truly is about Godzilla that attracts people to him and why he's been so endearing. And the only way to truly do that successfully is to review every Godzilla movie ever made. Some people might be angry, but regardless, welcome to Zazubaar's Godzilla Palooza. Greetings, citizens of Monster Island. I am Zazubaar, and welcome back to Godzilla Palooza. It's day 13 of our romp through all of the Godzilla films, and today we're going to be taking a look at 1972's Godzilla vs. Gigan, the introduction of one of Godzilla's most famous and unique enemies, no one else but Gigan. Yes, indeed, this is Gigan's first movie, and also Ghidorah's first movie since Destroy All Monsters. He's Gigan's partner, in destroying Earth. And also, this is Anguirus' first prominent appearance since the original Godzilla raids again. He was in Destroy All Monsters, but he wasn't like prominently featured as one of the main monsters. He fights Ghidorah, and you see him on Monster Island frequently, but he wasn't like as prominently featured as he was in Raids Again, or as he is in this. He is like kind of the top billed monster right after Godzilla himself, and Gigan, obviously. So, this film is notable for that as well. Godzilla vs. Gigan is very much so a continuation of the sort of tone we have with Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, though it's really not as serious, and also, I feel like this movie is kind of going back to what they were doing before Destroy All Monsters. Like, I feel like the tone is very similar to Ghidorah, in that Godzilla was a superhero and there's this very sci-fi, well, not sci-fi, I mean, Ghidorah wasn't really sci-fi, but it was like, just a superhero 70s kind of tone. Although this film isn't much so stinking of the 70s as Ghidorah is. But it's got a very similar tone. And the thing with this film, though, is that it's very much so going back to what Honda and Sekizawa were doing with the Showa Godzilla trilogy, as I named it, Mothra vs. Godzilla through Invasion of the Astro Monster. And overall, this movie is very similar to, in plot-wise, the Invasion of the Astro Monster, just without space travel. And that's a little bit of a problem, makes the film a little stale, but not so bad where you don't enjoy it. I never really had much of an opinion on Godzilla vs. Gigan until I watched it for this review. I always liked it. I didn't hate it like some people seem to do. I mean, I see it pop up on top 10 worst Godzilla movie lists all the time. And I'm not really sure why. Even before I watched it for this review. Even before that, though, I mean, it was just not a movie I hated, not a movie I really loved, but I just was kind of, I don't want to say indifferent, because it was an early one for me, not one of my first, but it was like, first couple years of being a Godzilla fan, I saw this movie. And I just kind of felt like it's not bad. I mean, it's just not the greatest thing ever. And watching it for this review, I still don't think it's the greatest thing ever, but I don't think it's bad at all. I think it's actually quite good for what it is. And what it is it's high-octane Monster Rumble fun. It's kind of like a very simplified version of Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. And Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster is not the most complex film ever, but it's a little bit more intricate than this film is. Like, this is a very kind of straightforward alien invasion plot mixed in with corporate espionage, kind of a James Bond-esque kind of plot. And so was Invasion of the Astro Monster, so was Ghidorah. That also had a kind of a James Bond-esque tone, very famously. I mean, on the back of the Toho Masterworks thing of Ghidorah, it actually says, love for James Bond-esque intrigue. And this film is very, very much so kind of going back to what Honda was doing with that trilogy. And this isn't a Honda film. This is actually directed by Jun Fukuda, and I didn't even know until I looked it up. His style is just not in this. And it's not a very comedic film. It's not a very goofy film. It's kind of just kind of a played straight sci-fi story, you know, a straightforward, you know, sci-fi Godzilla story. And I'm not going to say it's not campy, because it definitely is, but it's more of a serious kind of campy. Kind of like a better version of Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster in terms of a tone. Like, none of that stupid goofiness is in Godzilla vs. Gigan. It is a very serious film. And, I think both adults and kids can enjoy it, and that's ultimately why I think it is so good as a campy Godzilla movie. In fact, I think it's probably, of the later Showa series, my third favorite film. My number one is Terror of Mechagodzilla, my second is Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and my third is probably Godzilla vs. Gigan, since I think it's kind of like a blueprint for what Fukuda's going to do with Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and making a kind of goofy sci-fi Godzilla film, but also making one that is quite serious and can be enjoyed on a serious level, where the campiness and the goofiness of it doesn't outweigh taking it seriously and enjoying it. I'm not going to go out there and say that this film is thought-provoking or, you know, a genius piece of art. No, not at all. But it's damn fun. And that's why I don't think it deserves to be on some people's top 10 worst Godzilla movie lists. And the other reason why I think it ends up there quite a bit, and I can definitely see this criticism, and it is one of my criticisms of the film, is the use of stock footage. This movie is littered with stock footage, you know, from the opening frames to the ending frames. A lot of the monster battle stuff is stock footage. Well, a lot of the stuff with Ghidorah is stock footage from mainly Invasion of the Astro Monster, though there is a little bit of Ghidorah in it, and a little bit of Destroy All Monsters in it. I think that also, strangely enough, has kind of a connection to the older Showa stuff. Yeah, so I can definitely see that criticism, and I agree. I just don't think that ultimately ruins the film. I mean, sure, that's one of the biggest problems with Godzilla's Revenge. By the way, I just want to apologize for this. In my review of Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, I actually said Godzilla vs. Revenge. I apologize. It was, I was having a weird day yesterday, and that just kind of was an after product of it. So it's Godzilla's Revenge. So unlike Godzilla's Revenge, which I think was kind of ruined by the use of stock footage, this film uses stock footage in the way that stock footage, if it needs to be used, should be used. You use it to do things that you don't want to reshoot, but it's the same thing in the script. Like with Godzilla's Revenge, they were lifting entire fights and putting it in the movie and calling it new stuff. With Godzilla vs. Gigan, they're not doing that. They're taking little itty-bitty shots and putting it in where they don't want to reshoot. They're kind of cutting corners. And I don't mind cutting corners in a movie as long as it isn't distracting, and I'm not going to lie, it is a little bit in Godzilla vs. Gigan, but not nearly as much as Godzilla's Revenge. This movie, the stock footage is only noticeable if you know Godzilla stuff. Like, with Godzilla's Revenge, the big thing that made it noticeable was the switching between Godzilla suits. And it's so quick in this movie that you can hardly notice that it's a different suit. The only time I had a problem with it was when they were taking stuff from Ghidorah, because that Godzilla suit is very iconic. So when you put it in, it doesn't look anything like the Godzilla suit that they're using in this movie, which is the one they used in Destroy All Monsters. I know I haven't talked about that suit yet in detail. I want to talk about it in this review because this is kind of its most infamous appearance. So I'm going to touch on it, don't worry, in detail, as I've done with the other suits. But the reason why it's not so, it is a little bit jarring when they use footage from Ghidorah is that that Godzilla suit's very iconic and appeared in 2 films. and two widely loved films, so I feel like that causes a problem. Also, they use that's the most footage that they use in excess, excuse me, because they don't shoot a lot of new stuff with Ghidorah. He kind of is almost 70% stock footage, but so whenever he fights Godzilla on his own, it's kind of always stock footage, which is a little bit disappointing because it makes a really strong attempt at bringing back and kind of pronouncing the arch rivalry between Godzilla and Ghidorah. So I don't like that. Otherwise, the stock footage is not very noticeable unless you're looking for it. Like, I feel like it just kind of blends in with the rest of the film, except at points when the Godzilla suit is clearly not the same thing. So I can see why people would put it there for that reason, but I don't ultimately think it ruins the movie. Because again, it's just so damn entertaining. Again, I'm not going to go out there and say it's one of my favorites, because it's not, but it's not bad at all. I mean, for what it is, which it's just trying to be an entertaining sci-fi film, it's great. I think it's great anyway. And we'll get into the plot, which is the big reason for why I think it's good, in a few seconds. I just wanted to go out and say that I don't think this movie is bad at all. I just think it's not amazing, which, you know, again, that doesn't make a movie bad. It just makes it not amazing. And for what this movie is trying to be, I think it's quite good. And we'll get into that in a little more detail as we get into the plot. But let me just outline a few production things I want to bring up that I'm going to be bringing up later. Fukuda's back on Godzilla. I don't know how I feel about that. This is definitely one of his best directing jobs on a Godzilla film. I think Son of Godzilla is probably his second best, but in terms of, you know, the more serious stuff, I think that this is up there. And here, let me just give you a list, because if you've seen my other videos on my channel, you know how I feel about Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, which is the last Godzilla film he directs, so whatever, I'll just spoil my opinions on it a little bit here. Here's my list of Fukuda's Godzilla films. Number 1 is Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Again, in terms of overall, I'm going to put Son of Godzilla at 2, Gigan at 3, and Sea Monster sucks balls, so I'm not going to put it anywhere. And I don't think he directed Megalon, but that movie is even worse than Sea Monster, so, but believe me, we'll get there. I don't think he directed that, though. I could very well be wrong. I'll find out tomorrow. See, this is probably my third favorite Fukuda-directed Godzilla film, and I know he didn't direct a lot, so that's not really a huge accomplishment, but let me just say, he does really good with this, and it's definitely one of his best directing jobs on Godzilla. So with all that said, I also wanted to bring up that Ifukube is back in Godzilla for the first time since Destroy All Monsters, and his music is pretty awesome here. There's a lot of recycled stuff from like the Showa trilogy and Destroy All Monsters, which is kind of a problem, but it's so epic you don't care. Ifukube reuses a lot of his old scores anyway, but he does, you know, kind of reorchestrate them in that he does them again. Like, this is just straight lifting the recordings and putting them in. It mostly works, though sometimes it's a little jarring when you jump from tracks. But otherwise, it's Ifukube. It's fucking epic. And his new score is very good. It fits the movie perfectly. The opening credits are epic. And I think that's really all I wanted to bring up. So, although, Shinkichi Sekizawa is one of the head writers on this, so he's kind of back in Godzilla as well, but I don't think he's not going to be sticking around, I don't think. But he's involved, so it's notable for that reason. He's been on the franchise for a long time. He kind of defined the Showa series, and I think that's also kind of why this is kind of a throwback to the Showa Godzilla that I like. So that's also partially why I like this movie as much as I do. So let's get into the plot. Basically, it goes down like this. There is a manga artist in Japan whose name is Gengo Kotaka. Sorry, I'm not great with Japanese names. And he gets hired by this, basically this charitable foundation called World Children's, I think, Corporation or something. Basically, they're devoted to building stuff for children and kind of bringing the children of the world into unity and peace. And he gets hired there, but he starts to get suspicious about their activities when he bumps into a girl one day who's going up to the headquarters of the World Children's Land Committee. I forget what it's called. I'm going to call it the World Children's Land Committee, because I forget what they call it. And he bumps into her, and she's freaking out and being chased by his boss and a bunch of henchmen. And she drops a tape. And later that night, she goes to him and ends up forcing, basically having him faint by her friend sticking a thing of corn in his back, and he thinks it's a gun, so he faints. They retrieve the tape and listen to it, which it turns out that it's this weird, like, sonic frequency that can only be heard by the monsters on Monster Island, specifically Godzilla and Anguirus. So Godzilla sends Anguirus, kind of like a military general, to check out what's going on in Japan and what's causing this strange noise. So Anguirus goes to Japan, and apparently this is all a big ruse by these people, you know, these members of the World Land Committee who turn out to be aliens, cockroaches in fact, in order to test out the Earth military force, to see how strong they are. They're not impressed, so Anguirus goes back to Monster Island. And then later on in the film, after our main human cast are looking for, the reason why this girl was snooping around the area was because her brother was working for them, the World Children's Land Committee, and he hasn't come home in weeks. So they she begins to think that something fishy is going on. So that's why she broke into the thing to find out what's going on. So using Gengo as kind of a spy, he keeps going back and forth into the... They're basically building this... I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure how to describe this plot, because it is a little bit intricate. Basically, they're building this this amusement park kind of thing for children, all based around monsters, mainly Godzilla and the monsters on Monster Island. They are building this huge Godzilla tower that's life-size around the main headquarters. And that's the building he keeps going back to, you know, for work and also to spy on these people. So he begins to not only believe them, but try to help them take down this place, and of course discovers the whole alien thing. And the aliens reveal that they're trying to conquer the Earth and destroy all the humans on it for peace. And the question is, peace for who? Well, peace for them, because they come from a world where human-like creatures polluted their world to such a point where the world was destroyed. And they came to Earth to stop the same thing from happening here and conquer it before the Earthlings can destroy it, so that way that they can have peace for their civilization. It's a little convoluted. We'll get to it in a sec. I just want to wrap up this plot synopsis by saying their plan to destroy the Earth involves them taking control of two monsters, one a new monster called Gigan, and also using King Ghidorah to destroy the Earth and conquer it, of course. But they realize that they can't just destroy the humans and expect to conquer Earth. Given Godzilla's character nowadays, they've got to kill him too, because now he's a superhero. So they try to get Gigan and Ghidorah to attract Godzilla to... So Gigan and Ghidorah start attacking Tokyo by the control of the cockroaches. And meanwhile, the human characters are being held hostage. They eventually do escape, but basically I'll just outline the rest of the monsters, because the humans don't have a lot more to do besides destroy the aliens, which they do succeed in doing that outside of the monster stuff. So basically, Gigan and Ghidorah attack Tokyo. Godzilla and Anguirus show up to stop them. And Godzilla is attracted to the area by Gigan and Ghidorah. Their fight goes there, the World Children's Land Committee, and they basically want them to get Godzilla in front of the Godzilla Tower, so that way they can use these highly deadly laser beams to kill him. It works. They get Ghidorah and Gigan to bring Godzilla to the area, and they blast the ever-living shit out of him with the lasers. However, in the meantime, the humans blow up the aliens' base and kill them all. So the monsters are all under their own free will again, kind of like Invasion of the Astro Monster. Godzilla is very much so at death's door, and Gigan and Ghidorah... I guess Gigan kind of became Ghidorah's friend, and Ghidorah, having a grudge against Godzilla despite not being under the aliens' control, wants to kill him anyway. So a fight is underway. Gigan uses the opportunity to try and kill Godzilla. Godzilla is severely weakened and almost is killed, but randomly he regains all his strength and beats the monsters with Anguirus, and the two fly off back into space, not being killed again, but just being defeated. Again, I kind of like that. So that way they can be used again later. And then, of course, we have a nice wrap-up. Godzilla and Anguirus return to Monster Island. So this plot, I really, really like it. It's very well-paced, and no scene drags. That's the one thing I was surprised about, because I've heard complaints that this movie is incredibly boring until the last 45 minutes, and I was really nervous watching it. So I was watching and I'm like, oh god, I'm remembering this movie being really draggy, and it wasn't at all. Every scene is integral to the plot, nothing drags, all the humans are very enjoyable and make the scenes that are centered on them very easy to watch. Not only easy to watch, but fun to watch. And that last 45 minutes, holy shit is it cool. Everything with the monsters is just awesome. Again, yeah, they don't show up until 45 minutes into the movie. But you know why that's not we've talked about this before, but that's not a problem as long as you've got likable and interesting human characters. And they're not super interesting. I mean, they're not like Gojira's cast, but they're likable enough and good humored enough to the point where you don't care that there's a lot of scenes centered around them because they are so likable, and they really keep the plot going. And also what makes them good Godzilla protagonists is the fact that they're very proactive. They're constantly trying to find out what's going on with these corporate people and then finding out they're aliens and trying to stop their plans. And the fact that they're so proactive doesn't make the film draggy like some Godzilla casts tend to be. Like, they kind of just let stuff happen to them. And the fact that they are so proactive in this allows the plot to move very naturally and move at a good pace. So I really like the plot progression. I think it's very strong. I also really like the corporate espionage angle, because like most monster movies that have human filler in it, and it doesn't really even count as filler in this film because it's so well written and well put into the plot, that you kind of need something, a human drama element, to keep the plot and moving in a good way when there's no monsters on screen. And the corporate espionage thing is a great device to do that. Just to throw out some examples of other monster movies that have this sort of thing. Gorgo, the original, Gorgo has that plot with the gold. The original Gojira has the love triangle, and then this film, it has the corporate espionage. And people have complained that this film kind of set the rest of the Godzilla films on kind of a tangent of ripping off James Bond movies. Fine, I see it. I don't necessarily think it's a problem. I just think it's kind of, every movie in that decade was trying to be a James Bond movie until Star Wars came out, and then everything was trying to be Star Wars, including James Bond. But James Bond, it's undeniable that James Bond was very popular at this point in nearly every country, so it's very easy to see and forgive that Godzilla was kind of ripping off James Bond. And also, given what Godzilla is at this point in time, I think it kind of fits. I mean, James Bond isn't a superhero, but he's close enough, and I think that tone fits well with a superhero Godzilla film. So I like the James Bond-esque aspects of it. I mean, I'm a James Bond fan, so it doesn't really bother me that that's being taken into a Godzilla film. So I like it. It doesn't really feel out of place, and it meshes well enough with the human drama that it fits, and the James Bond tone doesn't bother me like it does some people. But maybe that's just because I'm a James Bond fan. I don't know. But the James Bond-esque aspects of it I like and don't bother me at all. The biggest criticism I have, well, two criticisms of the plot that I have. The big one is that it's very similar to Invasion of the Astro Monster. The alien invasion plot is quite similar. I mean, in Invasion of the Astro Monster, the corporate espionage stuff wasn't at the center of the plot like it is here. But in that film as well, they had the aliens becoming, they created a front for toys, and they were on Earth and they were disguised as people, and they were using monsters to destroy the Earth. It's very similar, I get it. Their motivations are quite different though, and this is what sets them apart from the people of the Planet X, sets them apart from the cockroaches. And here's the big thing. The people of the Planet X were very much so conquering the Earth. With the cockroaches, they're not so much conquering as wiping out all humans. The people of the Planet X didn't want to wipe all people out. They wanted to integrate them into the Planet X society and make them work for them. The cockroaches don't want that at all. They literally want people to be gone so that way they can't destroy the Earth, and that way they can have peace for their people, the cockroaches. So not only do I not think that it being similar to Astro Monster is a problem, but I think that the aliens in this film are threatening enough and different enough from the people of the Planet X that I don't think the similar aspects to the Invasion of the Astro Monster is worth crying over. I think it's definitely noticeable and does feel a little stale, but I didn't say this movie was brilliant, I just said it worked good for what it is, and it's a great alien invasion Godzilla film. It's not as good as the alien invasion from Destroy All Monsters, only because you don't quite feel the gravity of it. The aliens aren't as threatening as the people for the Planet X and the Keelax were, only because we don't quite feel the gravity of their invasion, like we did with those films. But again, it's not a problem. It didn't bother me. It's just kind of an observation. But that's what doesn't make it as good as them, and kind of makes it a little stale, but I like their motivations, and I like them as villains, so I don't really care. So I really like the plot. It's ultimately the biggest plus of the film, and it moves at such a great pace. So natural, no scene drags, and I love it. So great plot. I love it. I kind of already talked about the human characters. They're likable and good-humored, excuse me. And again, they're not super interesting, but that doesn't bother me because they're proactive and they're likable. So I really like our lead, Gengo Kotaka. I like the manga thing. I'm a big fan of comics, and manga are kind of Japanese comics, so I related to that, and I liked that, and I kind of connected with that. So I like him. I think he's very geeky, and geeky in a good way, and that he's not a geeky shut-in like Ichiro was in Godzilla's Revenge, or kind of Ken was a little bit in Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, but not as bad as Ichiro was. But as an adult and kind of a big geek who does this kind of stuff for a living, he's very likable. A little bit of a not socially awkward, but a little bit of a social outcast. You can just tell this by the way he dresses. Constantly wears a trench coat, wears his hair down over his face. He looks like a very kind of eccentric comic book geek, and I love that because I am that. So I connected with that, and I like him as a protagonist because of that. It might be a personal thing, it probably is, but whatever. This is my review of the film, so if someone disagrees out there, fine, but that's how I feel about it. Sorry to put it that way, but that's just how I feel. So again, they're likable, they are good-humored, not super interesting, but ultimately they drive the plot forward and they keep you entertained. So I love I like the human characters. I don't love them, again, because they're not super interesting. But again, that's not a problem, that's just... It just doesn't make them as good as other Godzilla casts, like the original Gojira, Mothra vs. Godzilla. It doesn't make them as interesting as them. It just makes them likable. So I like the human characters. They keep the plot moving, and that's what they should do. I already kind of touched on the aliens, so I'll just say I like them. I don't think they're as great as the people of the Planet X. They're threatening, they're unique, and they actually kind of contain an element of tragedy that I really like, in that they're kind of stopping humans from destroying the Earth. And that doesn't make them heroes, but it makes them sympathetic in a way that the people of the Planet X really weren't, and Honda wasn't making them out to be good people, or the Kilax weren't. But it makes these aliens feel sympathetic because, listen, it's nothing personal, but you're destroying this world, we can do better, you're out. So they contain an element of tragedy. Again, they're not meant to be as sympathetic villains like frickin' Ra's al Ghul from Batman Begins or Adrian Veidt from Watchmen, but they're sympathetic to a point where I understand what you're doing. I can't ultimately condone your actions because I'm a person, but I understand what you're doing. You did what you had to do, but listen, here's a gun to your face. So I really like the aliens for that. They're very threatening, and you need that with a Godzilla villain, so I like that. The only thing that bugs me with them, and this is just a plot hole. Oh, I forgot to mention this before with the plot. This movie has a couple of gaping plot holes. And the big one for me is the fact that the aliens don't say how they got their bodies. It's explained in basically two scenes that the cockroaches came to Earth and took on the forms of dead people so that way they could, operate on Earth without obviously attracting too much attention to themselves. So they took on the skins and forms of dead people. Mainly these two people named Fumio Sudo and Kubota? Basically just two Japanese men. The plot hole is that they don't explain how they know who these people are and where they got their bodies from. They make a big, the main human characters make a big deal out of the fact that these people are dead, and that means that there's something fishy going on. But when we find out what the aliens are and why they are dead people, they don't explain where they get the bodies from or how they know about these people. They're just kind of there. We get that scene of them explaining that the two guys died, but There's nothing explaining how the aliens got their likeness and got their bodies. It was jarring for me because the film is quite intricate with the plot and described a chunk of other things. So I expected that. And the fact that there's a beginning of that, of that twist and an end of that twist, I needed the middle. How did they get the bodies? So I needed that middle thing for it to be complete and for me to fully condone it. So that's a problem. The other plot hole involving the aliens as well is that they don't explain how they got to Earth. We understand that these cockroaches have developed a kind of technology, but there's no explanation as to, did they come here on spaceships? Did they come here on meteorites? How the hell did they get here? Also, they talk about how their planet was basically destroyed. So how did they escape that explosion? I guess we're supposed to, kind of, work out that they came in spaceships. Fine, I understand that. But here's the thing with it. In every other Godzilla alien invasion movie, they always show the spaceships and show how the aliens got to Earth. Nothing like that in Godzilla vs. Gigan. So there's no explanation for how they got there and how they escaped their planet being destroyed. And yes, they are cockroaches. They can survive anything. But, how'd they get off their world and get into space? So that's definitely a problem. And again, a plot hole. The other, not so much plot hole, but plot quandary I have is that infamously in this film, Godzilla and Anguirus talk. Well, in the Japanese cut, there's these little like comic book bubbles that come out, comic book text balloons when they speak. But in the English cut, which is the cut that I watched for this review, by the way, let me just say this now. Since this is Godzilla Palooza, and I'm recommending a lot of these movies, I think I need to point out a problem with the DVDs. Avoid at all costs buying the 50th anniversary DVDs of any of the Godzilla films. Unfortunately, it's the only way you can get quite a few of them, but the DVDs are awful. It almost seems like TriStar doesn't want you to watch the Japanese version because... Alright, so if you go into the main menu of the DVD... I'm sorry this isn't about Godzilla vs. Gigan, but I feel like it's kind of... It plays into it. So if you want to skip this part, go right ahead and skip ahead a few minutes. I'll talk about the movie again. But this is just about the DVDs. So if you want to go ahead, go ahead. But this is, if you want to hear a criticism of Godzilla DVDs, then keep listening. But alright, so it almost seems like TriStar doesn't want you to watch the Japanese cuts because it is unbelievably difficult to get the audio sync down. Because here's what happens. You go into the main menu of the film, and you go into the audio setup, and you say Japanese dialogue, English subtitles on. Because if you don't do that, the movie will play with Japanese dialogue and no subtitles, so that's a problem. Anyway, so if you go into the main menu, you go to, English subtitles, Japanese dialogue, the movie will start playing and it will not show the subtitles. So here's what I did. I started watching the movie and I kept playing with the subtitles thing until it skipped through all the languages of English and French, and I think Spanish is there too, but I think it's just English and I forget. I think it's just English and French. And the English subtitles were doing something really weird. I pressed a button and I finally got it to go. But the subtitles were really on and off. Like, it would translate one phrase of a Japanese sentence, and then it wouldn't do the rest of it. Like, there would be like two whole back and forths of dialogue until it would start up the subtitles again. And it wasn't like it was doing the one of a few minutes ago, which was a problem with the Gamera 3 Blu-ray. This was like, it was only doing what was going on now, it just wasn't doing the rest of it. So it was unwatchable. So, I did some research. Otherwise, it's basically the same except for those text balloon things. And the title, the original Japanese cut is called Godzilla vs. Gigan, and the English cut is called Godzilla vs. English cut is called Godzilla on Monster Island, which makes no sense, but we're not even going to get into that. So again, my problem is just that you can't watch it in Japanese, so I had to watch it in English. I mean, it wasn't a big deal because the film is basically just dubbed without any edits, but the 50th anniversary DVDs are terrible. Don't buy them. Avoid them at all costs. But unfortunately, that's the only way you can get all the everything from Mechagodzilla 3 on to Final Wars is all 50th anniversary stuff. And I mean, the stuff before that with the Millennium series is fine, but the stuff after that's terrible. But whatever. Back to Godzilla vs. Gigan. So my plot quandary is that Godzilla and Anguirus start speaking when the tape starts playing. That tape I mentioned in the plot synopsis that gets Godzilla to send Anguirus to, Japan. My problem is that there's no reason why they start speaking. I thought that when the tape would start playing that the whole purpose was to decode what they were saying so the aliens could listen in on their conversations or whatever. That's not it at all. The tape's only purpose that I can think of is to get them to come to Japan, so that way that they can kill Godzilla and test out the Japanese military. There is no reason why we should understand what the monsters are saying. It's kind of cool to hear what Godzilla's saying from his own mouth rather than the translations of the fairies like we had in Ghidorah. But it's just fucking weird and comes out of nowhere, and it continues throughout the rest of the film except in one place where for some reason... Alright, here's what happens. When Godzilla starts talking, his roar gets all like scratchy and it starts like sounding like a DJ remix of it. Like kind of like... kind of like that. Like kind of like you're playing with a record. And then the dialogue starts going over like a Japanese or some guy just, saying Godzilla's lines, and the same thing's for Anguirus. It continues even when the tape's not playing. Like there's a scene in the water where Godzilla and Anguirus are swimming to Japan and they're talking to each other and you hear that little thing and there's no reason for it. The tape's not playing, it's just the thing for no reason. And there's another part that's even worse because randomly when Godzilla just bends down to Anguirus and starts to talk to him, that thing starts going and there's no dialogue, so we have no idea what Godzilla's saying, so it might as well have just been Godzilla's roar. There's no reason it had to be this weird thing. It's maddening. It's not terrible. Again, it does definitely distract your attention and hurts the movie's seriousness a little bit, but again, it's a little cool to hear what Godzilla's saying, so it's cool but ultimately not explained and ultimately fucking weird. So it's bizarre, hurts the movie's seriousness level, but not so much where it's unwatchable. So that's my other plot quandary, in that that's not explained at all. So let's talk about the monsters themselves now. Let's start with Gigan because he's kind of the main thing. He's the new monster. So let's talk about the new kid on the block, wink wink, Gigan. Gigan is really cool. He's one of my favorite Godzilla enemies because he's so goddamn unique. And there's nothing else that looks like him except for Megalon, but he's a ripoff of him, so whatever. I really love Gigan because he has a really distinctive personality, and it's a very famous Godzilla monster personality now. Gigan's kind of known as the treacherous Godzilla monster in that he's kind of a traitor to monsters he's teaming up with, and there's this great moment in this where him and Ghidorah start fighting. Seemingly over just Gigan ramming into Ghidorah. And it's not like a full-fledged fight, but it's just this cute little kind of quarrel. And then there's a point in the film where Ghidorah is down to having the shit beaten out of him by Anguirus, and Gigan in fear tries to run away and fly back up into space. Godzilla does shoot him down, but you get the sense that if Godzilla didn't do that, Gigan will be long gone and he would have left Ghidorah hanging. But they do end up escaping together only because Godzilla stopped Gigan. So I love Gigan's personality. It's very interesting. This movie is he does this in Megalon too, but that's one of the only good things about Megalon is that he runs away from the monster he's teaming up with. And it was so interesting that I actually wanted to do a series about Gigan by himself of explaining his origins and why he's like that and exploring that personality. I never got to make it, but I wish I did because I love Gigan. He's one of my favorite Godzilla enemies. This movie, again, it's not the greatest thing ever, but it is a really good introduction for him because he's really interesting in this when he's not mind controlled. When he's mind controlled, he's a little bit. The only thing that defines him is his look and his roar and the way he fights, in that he kind of uses his claws and that buzzsaw thing. But, when he's mind controlled, he's just kind of a weapon. But once he's out of mind control, he's very interesting and very cool. I love him. But even in the scene where he's attacking Tokyo with Ghidorah, he's really cool to see because of the different attacks he uses. Like when he buzzsaws through a building and when he slashes buildings apart with his claws, and it's just great. I really love Gigan. And he totally needed a better movie than this. I mean, this movie is good, but not amazing. Like, I think Gigan deserves, like, a really legitimately great Godzilla film appearance, kind of like Ghidorah has had. Or other Godzilla enemies. He really deserved that, but he didn't really get it. I mean, Final Wars is good, but not amazing. It's kind of like this movie, but I like Final Wars a little better than this, but I wish Gigan had that appearance. He doesn't, unfortunately. But regardless, I love him. So, let's get into Godzilla in this film. He doesn't really get any progression, but I like how far we're taking the superhero angle. And that Godzilla's characterization is more and more becoming like a real superhero. Not in the Gamera sense of kind of just a savior of children. He's really becoming kind of a, not Batmanish, but kind of a well-written Superman kind of thing, where he's kind of just, he's a superhero, and, he takes that very seriously. He's not just going out there to save the world because he can. He's doing it because he feels like he has to. And in this film, that's kind of brought to the center because he gets the ever-living shit beaten out of him by Gigan and keeps going. You people are going to make fun of me for this, I know, but I'm going to go this far. The scene where Godzilla is being shot by the lasers, I didn't cry, but I had that kind of feeling like, oh my god. I felt really emotionally connected and empathetic for Godzilla when he's just getting blasted by the laser beams. Like, oh my god, Godzilla is legitimately getting hurt. And this is also, I think, the first time we see Godzilla bleed, and that's a really big impact on it as well. Godzilla just gets messed up in this movie, and I love it. I love how he gets cut up by Gigan. Not only does it make Gigan really kind of dangerous, like you legitimately are worried about how Godzilla's going to get out of the situation, but I also like how Godzilla is kind of, it's kind of like the Dark Knight Rises. This is the point where I think you guys are going to make fun of me. The scene where Godzilla is getting blasted by the laser beams and is getting the crap beaten out of him by Gigan when he's almost dead is kind of like the scene where Bane breaks Batman's back in The Dark Knight Rises, and also Nightfall. Though Nightfall is definitely better than this. Well, so is The Dark Knight Rises, but it's kind of a similar scene. And that we see Godzilla just getting the crap beaten out of him, and he really tries to fight back, but he can't. I love it. And just like to see him down and just blood coming from him, being thrown around like he's a rag doll. It's just, oh, it's similar to the scene where Bane's fighting Batman in The Dark Knight Rises, and it's just very good drama, superhero kind of drama. So I love it. I think it's great. So there's a couple of other things I want to say about Godzilla in this film, but I'll kind of bring it in Ghidorah as well. Godzilla has a great moment, great two moments actually. One where that rivalry he has with Ghidorah is really brought out, and I love it. When Godzilla first sees Ghidorah is back, the look on his face is great. And it's not that his face is expressive because it doesn't really have too much character with the suit, but I think it's character enough. Where he looks at Ghidorah and you can tell, not you. Like, the look on his face is one of hatred and just, like, they look like arch enemies, and that's what I love about it. And I also love how Godzilla goes right for Ghidorah, totally ignoring the new monster. He just kind of runs right at Ghidorah and charges into him and leaves Anguirus to deal with Gigan. I love it. And I also love the kind of like the Old West standoff between Godzilla and Ghidorah, where it's a close-up shot of Godzilla, a close-up shot of Ghidorah, and then they fight, and it's great. My only problem with this rivalry and the fact that it's so brought out in this is that it leads to a lot of stock footage from Ghidorah and Invasion of the Astro Monster, which I don't like. I wish that there was new footage shot for this, only because I would have liked to see some more aggressive fighting between the two. And I feel like we're missing that with the stock footage. I mean, not that they're fighting in the other two movies weren't aggressive, but that arch rivalry thing wasn't brought out in those films. It is in this. So I feel like using stock footage from those films is kind of a hindrance, but it's not, again, it's not terrible. I wish it was used. Like, I wish they shot new footage with more of that hatred in the fight. But it's not there. But I like the pronunciation of the arch rivalry, so I think that's really well handled. And the scene where that comes out is great. Alright. Alright, so let's talk about the other one I really like. The other shot with Godzilla that works towards his characterization that I really like. It's a comedy moment, but it's a legitimately funny one. Where Godzilla kind of gets away from the fight between, him, Anguirus, Gigan, and Ghidorah, and he just kind of goes off on his own for a moment. And he sees the Godzilla tower that the aliens have built. The look on his face and the fact that he bangs his head to try and get his eyes to see straight, to see what he's looking at, is not only hysterical, but it's epic. I've never seen Godzilla with a look of bewilderment on his face, but that's the look he has on his face. Like, he just bangs his face, with his fist to get his eyes to see straight. And there's this great POV shot where we get the camera. It's supposed to be Godzilla's eyes, and you see the tower, and it's all fuzzy, and you can tell Godzilla's banging his head, trying to see straight. And then he sees it, and he roars, and he gets all territorial with it, and then it shoots him. I love it. It's great, and it's funny, and it's good to Godzilla's characterization. So I love it. So that's Godzilla. I think he's great in this movie. It's one of my favorite superhero appearances of him because it is a very deep and very seriously taken version of the superhero version of Godzilla, so I love it. It's one of my favorite superhero appearances by him. So now that'll bring me into Ghidorah. Ghidorah is sorely underused in this film. He really feels kind of like a henchman in ways that he didn't. He almost feels like a bounty hunter in Godzilla vs. Gigan. Like, he's almost being rent out to different alien races for world conquest, and it's fine. I think it's kind of cool, but that's not what's said. And he just kind of comes off as a weapon, and I don't like that. He has a little bit of personality in this, though it's nothing like we had with Invasion of the Astro Monster. That's still probably my favorite appearance by him. No, it's not. Well, in the Showa series, that's my favorite appearance by him. I do like him in this movie. It's just, he's just kind of underused, and a lot of his footage is stock footage, and I don't like that about it. It's just kind of like, it's almost like, why would you even put him in this movie if you weren't going to shoot anything great with him? A lot of the coolest things he does is stock footage, so I don't feel the need to say a lot about him. He's just mostly stock footage. I like his rivalry with Godzilla. I like how he's part of that whole stare down thing, and he looks at Godzilla, just like Godzilla looks at him. There's also this great shot where he's watching Gigan almost kill Godzilla, and he's laughing, and I love that about it. Like, he's really glad to see Godzilla dying. I almost would have, if I was directing this movie, I would have done this, and this is kind of reaching. I'm just gonna say this: if I was directing this movie, this is what I would have done. I would have had Ghidorah get mad that Gigan's about to kill Godzilla, and he would have kind of told Gigan, "Hey, hold him down so I can finish him off." And there would have been this great little quarrel between Godzilla and Ghidorah and Gigan, and there would have been this. That would have given a great opportunity for the other plot hole of the film that I want to bring up now. Is once Godzilla is at death's door, there's no explanation for how he gets strong again. This is literally what happens. Gigan throws Godzilla into the broken Godzilla tower, and when Godzilla gets up, he's all strong again. There's no explanation for how he got that way. But having that little quarrel between the two would have been a good opportunity for Godzilla to recover. But it's not used, and it's not a problem. It's just, I would have done that. So I think that's kind of cool. So I like Ghidorah in this. I love his rivalry with Godzilla, but that's really it. I mean, his attack scenes are for the most part stock footage, and his fight with Anguirus is all stock footage. So disappointing, but not entirely terrible. So Ghidorah is good, just, it's just kind of since because of the stock footage. So, I don't have a lot to say about Anguirus either. This is probably my second favorite appearance by him in the Showa series, because, this is the first time he appears as Godzilla's pal, and I really like Anguirus for that reason. He was always kind of Godzilla's best friend, and this is where that started. Because, he was kind of Godzilla's enemy in Raids Again and Destroy All Monsters. He barely has any screen time. And then this idea of him and Godzilla being pals will come up again in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. So I really like it in this movie. They come off as a very kind of like seasoned pair of fighters, so that you feel like they've fought together before. So I really like that about it, and they come off as strong friends. I also like how Anguirus isn't like subservient to Godzilla. Like, Anguirus is kind of like questioning of Godzilla's authority. Like, there's a point where when Godzilla asks him to go and check out Monster Island, Anguirus is really grumpy about it. So I like that about it. It gives the monsters a very strong personality, and I like that about Anguirus. He's not great in this movie, but this is probably my second favorite appearance by him. So I love him. He's great, but ultimately not very integral. So that'll bring us into the effects. They're great when they're new. As I said in the last review, E.G. Sabraya passed away in 1970, so we're missing his charm here. The big thing that's missing for me is on Ghidorah and on the attack scenes. The buildings don't look as convincing in this film as they did in the early Showa series. And the reason why it's a problem is the fact that we're constantly cutting back the Sabraya shot footage with Ghidorah's attacks. And it's so much more detailed and realistic in the Sabraya shot footage. So when we cut back to the new footage, it's very jarring to get this jumping of ultra realistic to it looks good but it isn't entirely convincing. Like all of Gigan's attacks on the city are not ultimately very convincing as a giant monster destroying a city. I mean, they look cool, but they're not, really convincing like Sabraya's footage is. So, also the big thing with Ghidorah is not only his attack scenes look more realistic, but the fact that when he's flying, he moves his wings in the Sabraya shot footage, and in the new footage he doesn't. So it's very jarring, and again, it's not as realistic as Sabraya was doing it. So I don't like that. But again, it's not the effects in this movie are good, but it's jarring to jump back and forth. And the other problem with the effects, and this is also kind of the editing, but they do a lot of attempts at day for night with the old footage, and that a lot of the mainly everything they use of the old footage took place in the day in those films, and a lot of this entire movie during the monster scenes takes place at night. So when we've got stock footage of a Ghidorah destroying, like, I think it was basically a town during the daytime, and then we cut back to Gigan destroying a city at night, it's very jarring. And they try to do a filter thing like the traditional day to night thing. It doesn't work. It looks very unconvincing. It just kind of looks like a fade. Like, it looks faded. It doesn't look like night. So the effects are good when they're new. The last fight scene is awesome. And very dynamic and very versatile, and definitely some great stuff and very entertaining. The effects make this movie, especially with the monsters, worth it, and really put the cap on the whole entertainment value of the whole thing. The last 45 minutes of this movie are fantastic. They're extremely entertaining. It's high octane monster action, and it's very imaginative and very passionate, and I love it. Again, Fukuda and his team are getting better at shooting the monster footage, so we're getting ready for the big cap off on that in a couple of two movies. So stay tuned on Monday when we get into the great Fukuda stuff. So Fukuda and his team are great with this. It's not the effect shots only don't look good when you're comparing it to Sabraya, and that's a problem in this movie because they do that in the movie, like they show back and forth. So it definitely makes you miss Sabraya more than you might have if they didn't use as much stock footage. So I have to give the movie a criticism for that, but ultimately the effects look great, just not as good as Sabraya's work, and again, that's a problem because the movie draws attention to it. So the effects are good, just not as good as Sabraya's work. So, oh, wait a minute, I have to touch on something quick. I have to touch on the Godzilla suit. So before we end this review, let me do that. I haven't talked about this Godzilla suit, and I really should be putting more focus on it than I am. This is the most used Godzilla suit in Godzilla film history. It's used 4 times. It's used in Destroy All Monsters through Godzilla vs. Gigan. And it's infamous for that because it's falling apart in this movie. I think it ultimately looks fine. It's not as distracting as some people make it out to be. It definitely is a problem, just not as big of a problem as I think some people make it out to be. But the thing that really makes it unconvincing and it's problematic is the arms. This Godzilla suit became infamous for, especially in Godzilla vs. Gigan, for the arms falling apart and the scales kind of hanging off the arms. And it just doesn't work for making us buy this as a giant monster and as Godzilla because it's falling apart. I think people crack it up as a bigger problem than it is. I ultimately still like the suit. I love it in Destroy All Monsters, especially. I don't love the head. I like the face. I don't like the head. It's a little too short and kind of flat face. Not as bad as the Son of Godzilla suit, but it's rounded enough, but it's still a little flat. and has Godzilla looking a little bit like a frog, which I don't love, but again, not as bad as Son of Godzilla. So it's kind of like a happy blending of previous Godzilla suits and the Son of Godzilla suit where he needs to look more like a person. So I think it's a nice enough blending. I think it looks okay in this movie. It looked really good in Ghidorah. And it looks good in Revenge and Destroy All Monsters. I think it's also got a really nice hunched over position that I think the previous two Godzilla suits were lacking, and I like that. It's kind of a happy blending of the stuff that the Daisenso Goji suit and the Mikaso Goji suit were doing, and also previous stuff where Godzilla's a little more hunched over. So it looks a lot more like a dinosaur, or like Godzilla, I should say, than those past two suits did. I like it a lot. I'm gonna miss it. Even though we're not quite done with it yet, it's going to be used a couple more times in both stock footage and in water shots in the next two films. But otherwise, I really like the suit. I just wish that it wasn't overused. It's not the greatest thing ever, but I do ultimately really like it. So that's that Godzilla suit. Before we go to rating and recommendation, let's talk about the music. Again, it's Ifukube, he's back, and of course it's epic. Again, it's not his greatest stuff ever, but a lot of it is recycled from Mothra versus that Showa Godzilla trilogy I talked about. So it's epic, just sometimes it's not well placed. Like the theme for Mothra versus Godzilla transitioning into the theme from Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster is really jarring because it's just the music playing. And the big problem is that it's opening title music, and when you do that, it doesn't work with an action scene because opening credits are supposed to be like they're supposed to be a little marchy, and it doesn't ultimately work well with the action. Not as bad as King Kong vs. Godzilla, but it's a little bit more noticeable. Ifukube's new stuff is awesome. The opening credits music is amazing. And ultimately his score is great and memorable and gives the movie its epic tone. So I love it, but a lot of it is recycled in the wrong places. So problem there, but it's still epic. I love it. Ifukube is awesome. So let's go to rating and recommendation. I really like this movie. It's not amazing. It's not going to change the way you look at Godzilla, but if you're a fan of Godzilla, I do not recommend you skip it. I think it's great. I think it's a lot of fun, and that's the big reason on why I recommend it, because it is so much fun. I think if you skip it, you're a soulless monster, and I think this movie is very underrated. Again, it's not the greatest thing ever, but it doesn't need to be because it wasn't trying to be. It was just trying to be an entertaining Godzilla movie, and it fully succeeds at that. I think it's a bottle full of awesome. I highly recommend it. Don't skip it. But the problem, there are some plot holes. It's a little too similar to Invasion of the Astro Monster than I would have liked. And the special effects and the stock footage are very jarring. So I can't give it a perfect score, and I can't give it a great score. But I am going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. I think it's awesome. I highly recommend it. If you're a Godzilla fan, again, if you're trying to introduce someone to Godzilla who's not, don't show them this movie because it doesn't make a great case for them. But I think if you're a Godzilla fan, this is awesome and very entertaining, and it's just trying to be a great Godzilla campy, sci-fi film. It succeeds at that fully. Watch it, it's awesome, but try to get it in some other way than the 50th anniversary DVD because it sucks. So that'll about do it for this review of Godzilla vs. Gigan. Again, 3.5 out of 5. I highly recommend it. And that'll about do it for Godzilla Palooza Day 13. Join me tomorrow when we go into one of my least favorite Godzilla films, which strangely enough became a cult classic, but I absolutely hate it. When we get into 1973's Godzilla vs. Megalon. Join me tomorrow for that review, unless you hate this movie like I do, but I gotta watch it, so people endure the pain with me. See you tomorrow for that review. Zazubaar out. And sayonara.